Why can't I fund my IUL policy with one big lump sum on day one of the policy and just be done with it? I don't want to wait. Welcome to episode 4 of our Secrets to a Tax-Free Growth series. Today we are going to go over exactly this, the laws and reasons behind why you can't fund it all in one swoop, what effects does this have on your rate of return, and is there any workarounds to this? You might be surprised. Stay tuned. So the very first of the 3 topics we're going to cover in this video are why and what are the reasons and laws behind this. The very simple answer is because of TAMRA of 1988. This was a tax code, the Technical and Miscellaneous Revenue Act, that essentially said we need to generally spread out our funding of our universal life policies. Now, before TAMRA, you could have come in and say you had $1 million and you wanted to open one of these fixed universal life policies and kind of get your tax-free growth. You could have moved it over in one swoop, been done with it, and you're grandfathered in. Even when TAMRA came out, you were still good because you were grandfathered, and let that grow tax-free. After TAMRA, this just isn't the case and still isn't the case today. Essentially what happened, and earlier in the series, in episode 2, I kind of went over this with how can universal life be used for living benefits. But what happens is universal life comes out in 1980. Well, because people started to realize, well, I can move my money all in one swoop over to this insurance company, have the money grow tax-free, I can access it tax-free. When I die, it transfers tax-free. I have market-like returns and I have protection from market downturns. Well, because that was the case, people were moving their money over. Well, eventually the government comes in and kind of says, well, what are you doing? You're using insurance for like retirement or tax-free growth. What are you talking about? This is life insurance, not some sort of investment. E.F. Hutton brokerage firm, the main kind of pioneers of using universal life in this way, end up going to court with them. Well, they realized they weren't actually doing anything wrong, and that's when the government steps in and says, okay, we need to redefine what life insurance is. Reason being, they don't want people moving over $1 million for $1,001,000 worth of insurance. Well, because is that really even considered insurance? So they needed to redefine that. That was TEFRA of 1982 and DEFRA of 1984. Those kind of redefined, for example, if you moved $1 million over, how much life insurance did you actually need to be able for it to consider life insurance and not an investment or create a modified endowment contract? Well, even though they changed these laws and now you need more insurance, people were still doing this, right? They didn't really see this as a negative. They're like, okay, well, I'm not gonna get a 0.01% fee anymore, but I can still get a net internal rate of return of less than 1% over the course of a policy. I'm still going to continue to move my money here. Essentially, they kind of needed to put a slow on this. They didn't want to stop it because many banks and corporations were putting some of their tier 1 assets here. They just wanted to slow it. They didn't want to go out of business because if they don't, well, who's going to put their money in a bank? And then TAMRA is born. TAMRA says this is the fastest you can put your money into a policy to hit the guideline single premium. The guideline single premium is generally going to be how much money you are going to fund the policy over its lifespan. So if you have a guideline single premium of $1 million, that's how much money you're going to move over. And your TAMRA premium is $200,000. Well, you can only put in $200,000 a year until you get to that million, which is your guideline single premium. So in this case, you would have to spread out the $200,000 over the 5 years. And that is why that's kind of the history behind why you can't just put it all in the beginning. You used to be able to, but now you can't because of TAMRA of 1988. The second thing we're going to go over is how does this actually affect the performance or the internal rate of return of my policy today? So let's kind of get into the nuances of how that actually looks. Now, first thing here, very simply, and you've heard me mention this in other videos, but generally over the course of around 30 years, you're going to net an internal rate of return of less than 1% and a fee compared to the illustrated rate. So if you're gaining 7%, you might net 6%. Now, what is that actually entailing? If it's me putting in $1 million, for example, and we have that 200,000 MEC premium, so I'm putting in 200,000 a year for 5 years. Is that assuming I put the $1 million in year 1 and calculating it that way? Or how is IRR actually calculated in this case? This is actually pretty simple. If you really want to know the nuances of how IRR is calculated, I do have videos about this. They'll be separate from this series. But essentially what IRR does is it calculates your rate of return accounting for your inflows and outflows and when those happened. So even though you're spreading it out over 5 years, it's accounting for how much you put in each year. So in year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in this case, those would be your inflows, and then your outflow would be your, let's assume you didn't take any loans, your cash value at year 30, or whatever year you want to calculate it at. And essentially, because some people just don't fully understand this, they'll make the mistake of, if they were, say, putting in $1 million over 5 years, going out into the future and saying, hold on, this is 15 years later, using the rule of 72, for example, maybe this should have doubled twice already and it hasn't in my policy illustration. What they don't realize is they spread that out over 5 years. They didn't have the full million in there the whole time. And so it's not like, for example, let's say you put the 200,000 in on day one, it's not like that 800,000 isn't also growing in some other vehicle while you're waiting to actually put it into the policy. So if you have it in a mutual fund or a CD or a high yield savings or wherever you actually have this money elsewhere, and if it's growing, let's just assume it is, well, you're still getting that rate of return on that money that's not going to be reflected in the policy illustration because that's separate. That's not the IUL. So you have 800,000 that's growing over the course of those other 4 years. Now again, it's 800,000 the first year, then 600,000, then 400, 200,000 as you're continuing to put money in. So you're left with other money that's it's just not going to go into the IUL, but that was still growing separate from your IUL. It's not too complicated. Main thing you just want to know is when you look at the starting value and the ending value, realize that your whole $1 million in this case isn't in on day one of year one. You also have, in this case, the additional 800,000 that's growing elsewhere, assuming you have it in something that's growing and not sitting in a bank that's giving you 0.01% interest. Finally, last but not least, number 3, is there a workaround to this? What if I really just want to put this money away, be done with it? I don't want to deal with it. Can someone else fund the policy for me? Can it continue to grow during that time? Just want to fund this in one swoop. I don't want to deal with putting it in other things and having to write a check at the beginning of each year to send to the insurance company. I just want to put it in one swoop. In a case like this, let's say you had a big settlement, for example. What you can do, and not every company has this, only some do, but they'll have a premium deposit account. Essentially what that is let's say you're funding it with $1 million. What they'll say is, you can give this full $1 million to us, the insurance company, in one swoop. You can give it to us. We'll fund your first 200,000. Now what we'll also do is we'll take that additional 800,000, we'll put it in one of our premium deposit accounts, and we'll guarantee you, kind of like a high yield savings or a CD, for example, that it's going to grow at X%, and then we're going to put it in over those years. So I've done examples where, just to pinpoint one of them, there was 10 million and they wanted to put it in one swoop. Well, they put it in a premium deposit account that was gaining 5, and because it's not in the insurance policy yet, that 5% is going to be taxed just as if it was in a high yield savings or a CD. And then as it grows, they're going to account for that and put it into the policy. So if that was the case with the 10 million, instead of our guideline single premium being 10 million, the insurance company will account for the guaranteed interest that they're going to give you and say, this is how much the guideline single premium is. Maybe it's 10.6 million, for example, if they were giving you around 5%, and then after taxes, that's going to be put into the policy in total. So in this case, you would give the insurance company your 10 million or your 1 million, whatever example you want to use. The insurance company will take it upon themselves to fund this policy over 5 years, and they'll fund it with more than just the 1 or the 10 million based on the interest that they gave you. You just have to pay taxes on those gains, but you're not paying taxes on the gains once it's in the insurance policy and your cash value is growing. So plenty of times we do run into a situation where someone just wants to put the money in, they want to be done with it, move it over, we'll get the guaranteed interest and then kind of go from there. I think premium deposit accounts are a great option in these sorts of scenarios, especially just giving it to the company. You don't really have to worry about it anymore. They fund it. You don't have to kind of send that check each year, really be keeping in touch with it. Although, of course, you still should kind of know what's going on with your finances, be doing your annual reviews. But in this case, they're funding the policy for you. You can't really mess it up yourself. The insurance company is taking care of it. And that is the end of this one. Congratulations if you have made it all the way through the end of episode 4. I must say, one of my biggest beliefs is that we as humans need to take responsibility for our lives, whether that's providing for our family, their health, our own health, our finances, their financial future, our own problems. It does us no good to blame other people or blame the world for these things, especially things that we could have gone out and solved or made better on our own. And I firmly believe that this same belief applies to our finances. If you're going through this series, you are taking a step towards doing exactly that. Keep it up. Congratulations. If you are enjoying, be sure to subscribe, and we will see you in episode 5 where we go over, are insurance companies actually even safe? See you there.